He knew the chapter where this guy would be executed. He'd written it himself, rewritten it 30 times, and now he'd woken up in his body and there were 29 chapters left until the scaffold. The first thing he felt was the cold, not winter's cold, not the cold of illness, the cold of a stranger's body. The skin wasn't his, the hands weren't his, the breath wasn't his. Daniel Kahn opens his eyes wide and sees a ceiling with gilded griffins above his head. Beneath him is a bed 4 meters wide. Above him, a canopy of dark cashmere. Outside the window, a fountain splashes, and every splash pierces his ears as if the world had been turned up to maximum volume. Daniel sits up. His head is spinning. He looks at his hands, long pale fingers, slender wrists, nails polished to a shine, the hands of a man who has never lifted anything heavier than a glass in his life. He stands up. His legs are shaking. He reaches the mirror and freezes. Adrian Vale. Morningstar stares back at him from the glass. Silver hair down to his shoulders, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes with that very innate contempt that cannot be faked. Daniel knows this face. For 3 years, he had crafted this character's dialogue, argued with the author about his motives. He remembers every chapter of his downfall. Chapter 12, Public Humiliation at the Ball. Chapter 28, Disinheritance. 41st, Execution in the Square to the applause of the crowd. He had slipped into the body of the doomed villain, and this is where the strangest part begins. A translucent line of text flashes before his eyes, right in the air. That amber's a smell. It calls itself the Chronicle of Contempt. A dry, bureaucratic tone. Current points, 0. Method of accumulation through directed hatred and contempt. Daniel reads this 3 times. Then he quietly mutters that this is the most absurd leveling system he's seen in 10 years on the editorial staff. The system is silent. It doesn't care. There's a knock at the door. Quiet, timid. That's how those who are prepared for a blow. The door opens slightly. A thin maid squeezes through the crack. Blonde hair in a tight bun, eyes on the floor. On the tray, a cup of tea and a plate of cookies. Her hands are shaking. The cup clinks against the saucer, and Daniel knows why. In Chapter 6, the canonical Adrian will strike her with a whip for spilling tea. Chapter 6 hasn't come yet, but the girl is already afraid, which means she's always been afraid. And then Daniel does what Adrian has never done once in all 41 chapters. He smiles. Not a smirk. Not a snarl. He just smiles like a normal person and asks her to put down the tray and sit down and asks if she's eaten anything today. The maid drops the tray. Tea spills onto the marble. The cookies roll under the bed. She stands there and stares at him without blinking. There's no confusion on her face, just the horror of someone whose world has fallen apart. The master isn't yelling. The master is smiling. Something's wrong. Very, very wrong. She drops to her knees and grabs the shards with her bare hands. Daniel crouches down beside her. He takes a shard from between her fingers. She flinches as if struck. He says not to worry, that her hands are more important than the cup. The girl looks up at him, her eyes full of tears, not from pain, from confusion. She quietly says a name, Sadie Rowe. Daniel nods. He says he'll remember. Sadie backs toward the door without looking away. The door closes. The system flashes again. Glasses. 1. Someone in this house has just thought of him with genuine fear. Her fear feeds the system, and the system feeds something else, something deep beneath his ribs, something that is still asleep. Daniel places his hand on his chest. It is quiet inside. Quiet for now. He turns away from the mirror, opens the closet, suits in silver and black velvet, a stack of gloves, and in the corner, a thin whip with a bone handle. That very one. Daniel takes it, holds it for a second, walks over to the window, and throws the whip into the garden. It sinks into the fountain without a sound. Behind the door, someone gasps quietly. Someone saw. Daniel sits down on the bed. He looks at his own hands. 11 chapters until the first disgrace. 29 until the execution. Time is short, but he has it. He knows where the holes are in this plot. He's rewritten this arc 30 times. And if anyone is going to survive here, it's the man who knows every crack in the script. He stands up. He squares his shoulders. First, he'll find the stable hand whom the canonical Adrian ordered to be beaten, and he'll revoke the order. Then he'll go down for breakfast and look into the eyes of the Duke, his father, and little Lily, the ones the real Adrian crushed every day simply by breathing. A new day in a foreign body, the first of the few he has left, and he intends to make the most of every one. Daniel walked down the stairs, counting the steps. 32, marble veined with gray, 2 lamps with magical light on each landing. The Morningstar estate was built so that everyone who entered would feel small. High ceilings, wide corridors, full-length portraits of ancestors, all with the same expression on their faces. Superiority. Daniel passed 15 portraits and not a single one of them was smiling. He turned toward the kitchen. It was warm there and smelled of bread. 2 servants froze like stone at his appearance. A cook named Gilbert took a step back and bowed so low that he nearly hit his forehead on the table. Daniel asked where the stable hand Tobias was. Silence. Gilbert looked at the second servant. The second servant looked at the floor. Daniel repeated the question. Gilbert replied that Tobias was in the stable, that the young lord's order had been relayed last night, that 2 guards had already gone to him that morning. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He was too late. Canon Adrian had given the order to beat the stable hand for some trifling matter. Daniel remembered this from the text, an insignificant detail, a couple of lines. But here, those couple of lines meant broken ribs and a battered face on a living person. He strode out of the kitchen. Then he ran. The estate was enormous. The stable stood at the far end of the courtyard, beyond the apple orchard. Daniel ran along the gravel path, his body not obeying him. Adrian Morningstar never ran. He was too proud to rush. His legs were tangled. His lungs were burning. Daniel ran to the stable and flung open the door. It was dark inside and smelled of hay. 2 guards stood over a man who was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Tobias, a young guy, about 20. His lip was split. His left eye was swelling shut. His shirt was soaked with blood across his stomach. One of the guards turned and saw Daniel. He stood up straight. He reported that the young lord's order had been carried out. His voice was steady. No doubt about it. It was routine. For them, for everyone, it was routine. Daniel stood in the doorway and felt the system flickering quietly in the corner of his eye. Chrono glasses. 3, 5, 8. Tobias looked up at him with such hatred that the air between them almost hummed. Sincere, pure hatred. The system drank it in like water. Daniel ordered the guards to leave. They left without asking questions. He crouched down in front of Tobias. The groom flinched back, pressed himself against the wall. He waited for more. Daniel said the order had been a mistake. that this shouldn't have happened, that he would call a healer. Tobias looked at him and didn't understand a word. It was written all over his face. Morningstar is apologizing. Morningstar is talking about a mistake. Morningstar is calling a healer for the stable hand. The world fell apart. Daniel stood up. He went out. He found a servant. He sent him for a doctor. Then he stood by the stable wall and breathed. The system showed 12 Kikorono points, all from Tobias. The stable hand hated him so much that a single glance was enough for 12 units, and each of those points burned. Because Daniel knew. It wasn't his fault, but it was his body, his face, his name. And to Tobias, it made no difference. He returned to the house, went up to the great hall. Breakfast, a long table for 20 people. 2 people were seated at it. Duke Renard Morningstar occupied the chair at the head of the table. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face carved from stone, silver hair shorter than Adrian's, eyes just as dark. But there was something else in them, something heavy. Daniel saw the system's translucent tag above him. Name, Renard Morningstar. Archetype, broken father. Key, trauma. Loss of control over inheritance. Chapter of the break. 36. Daniel blinked. The footnote didn't disappear. It hung over the Duke like an invisible caption. He shifted his gaze to the second person at the table. A little girl, 9 years old, dark hair, unlike the Morningstar's silver, so from a different mother. She was sitting on the edge of her chair and wasn't eating. A bowl of milk porridge stood before her. Lily Morningstar. The footnote above her was empty. Just like Sadie's, Lily was a nobody in the canon, a minor character, one mention in Chapter 19. She burned her brother's portrait and ran away. That was it. Daniel sat down at the table across from her. Lily flinched. She lowered her head even further. The spoon in her hand froze. She wasn't eating. Daniel looked at the porridge, then at Lily's neck. There was a barely noticeable redness there. Allergy, dairy. He remembered that. A single line from Chapter 33, a flashback. He'd marked that detail himself during editing. With a red marker in the margins, he'd written, "Nice detail. Leave it." Daniel turned to the cook standing by the wall and said quietly that Lady Lily was allergic to dairy. There was order to her rat. The porridge needed to be sent her to be taken away, and to bring her the eggs they were serving her father, but without pepper. She didn't like spicy food. The room fell silent. Gilbert froze with a napkin in his hands. The Duke slowly turned his head and looked at his son. Lily raised her head. For the first time all morning. For the first time in a week. Maybe for the first time in a year. She looked at her brother as if he had spoken in a language that didn't exist. No one in this house, in the 9 years of her life, had noticed that her neck turned red from dairy. No one had asked. No one looked. The cook took the porridge away. 3 minutes later, he brought eggs, without pepper. Lily looked at her plate, then at Daniel, then back at her plate, and began to eat, slowly, without taking her eyes off her food, as if she were afraid that if she looked up, it would all turn out to be a dream. The Duke was silent. He looked at his son over the rim of his coffee cup, and in his stony eyes, for the first time in a long while, something resembling a question appeared. Not anger, not suspicion, just a question. Who are you? What happened to you? Daniel ate in silence. He didn't look up. He felt the Duke's gaze and knew that one wrong move now would bring it all crashing down. A footnote above Renard flashed. Archetype. The broken father. The chapter of brokenness. Chapter 36. Chapter 36 is still far off, but he's already broken now. Daniel could see it in his hands. The Duke held the cup with both hands, though one would have been enough. That's how you hold it when you need to grab onto something. Breakfast ended in silence. Lily left first, small steps, quickly, as if she were running away. At the door, she paused for a second, turned around, looked at Daniel, and left. The Duke set down his cup and asked one thing. He asked if Adrian was ill. Daniel replied that he wasn't, that he just decided to pay attention. The Duke looked at him for another 5 seconds. Then he stood up and left. Daniel was left alone in the hall for 20 people. The system showed 14 chrono points. There were still remnants coming from Tobias. But from Lily, 0. And 0 from the Duke. They didn't hate him. They didn't understand him. And misunderstanding doesn't feed the system. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He thought that in the canon, this breakfast took up half a page. Adrian ate in silence. Lily didn't eat in silence. The Duke drank his coffee in silence. 3 people at a huge table, each in their own silence. He had just rewritten this scene, added 1 line about eggs and pepper, and everything changed. A small edit, not even plot-related, technical, but in good stories, it's the technical edits that make all the difference. In the hallway behind the wall, someone was crying quietly. From the sound of it, it was Sadie. Daniel didn't know why she was crying. Maybe because of the broken tray. Maybe because the host had asked if she'd eaten. Maybe simply because the world around her had changed overnight and she didn't know how to live in it. Daniel knew that feeling. He was living it himself right now. 3 days had passed. Daniel spent them exploring the estate. He walked the hallways and memorized everything. The layout of the rooms, the servants' names, the guard's schedule, the times when the Duke went into his study, the times when Lily painted in the corner of the east wing, the times when Sadie finished work and sat alone in the kitchen. He was learning to be Adrian, the gait, the posture, the way of holding his head tilted slightly back, the way he looked down on people even when they were taller than him. It wasn't difficult. His body remembered. His muscles remembered. All he had to do was relax, and his face would automatically take on an expression of cold superiority. Something else was harder. Every time Daniel said thank you to a servant, the servant would freeze. Every time he greeted someone in the hallway, that person would stand there for half an hour trying to figure out what had happened. Morningstar doesn't say thank you. Morningstar doesn't say hello. Morningstar walks right past. It's a law of nature, and Daniel was breaking it every half hour. On the 4th day, he sat down at a table in the library and began to count. There were 3 weeks left until he entered the Celestian Academy, 3 months until the debutante ball, 6 months until the poison case, a year until the tournament, about 2 years until execution according to the canonical schedule, 2 years of life. If he didn't change anything, the system hung in his peripheral vision constantly, 14 chrono points, barely growing. Tobias avoided it. The servants feared it but didn't hate it. Fear gave points, but weak ones, 1 or 2 a day, drops. Daniel opened the system interface and studied it more closely. Modifications, skills he could enhance, but only those he truly understood. Fencing. No, he'd never held a sword. Magic. No, he had no idea how aspects worked. Physical strength. No, he didn't know anatomy well enough. What did he know? He knew people. He'd worked with texts and authors for 10 years. He could read motivations. He could predict behavior. He knew the structure of conflict. He knew how a scene works and why it falls apart. These were his real skills. and the system allowed him to enhance them. He spent 5x cron points on editing, skill enhancement, reading people, not magical, ordinary, observation, micro-expressions, pauses in speech, direction of gaze, little things he'd noticed before but now saw more clearly. It was as if someone had increased the world's resolution by 20%. He tested it on Sadie. She brought tea, set it on the table. Her hands weren't shaking anymore, but she stood too stiffly. Her shoulders were tense, her breathing shallow. She was controlling every movement. She was afraid of making a mistake, not because he would punish her. She was afraid because she didn't believe there wouldn't be a punishment. Daniel thanked her and asked what kind of tea she had brewed. Sadie replied that it was jasmine. Daniel said jasmine was his favorite. It was a lie. He had no idea what kind of tea Adrian liked, but the lie was small and necessary. Sadie didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped half a centimeter. That was enough. The system flashed. 0 points from Sadie. Her fear was diminishing. That meant the flow from her would soon dry up. Every time he made someone else's life better, he made his own worse. Every kind word cost him strength. That was the system's rule, cruel and simple. Want to be strong, be hated. Want to be loved, be weak. Daniel closed the interface and went to Lily. She was in the east wing, sitting on the floor by the window, drawing, charcoal pencil on thick paper. Daniel walked over and sat down next to her, not too close. At arm's length, Lily froze. The pencil stopped. She didn't look up. Daniel was silent. He just sat there. After a minute, Lily started drawing again. He saw that she was drawing a horse, clumsy but full of character, ears pricked up, tail fluttering. He said the horse was beautiful. Lily didn't answer, but the pencil moved a little faster. The next day, he came to the east wing again. Lily was there. He sat in the same spot. He was silent. She was drawing. On the third day, she moved a little closer to him. On the fourth day, she placed a blank sheet of paper and a second pencil next to him. Daniel looked at the paper, then at Lily. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her drawing. But the pencil lay flat, parallel to the paper, an invitation. He picked up the pencil and began to draw. Bad, horribly bad. He drew something that looked like a cat with 5 legs. Lily looked at the drawing. Something new appeared on her face. Not a smile, not quite, but the corners of her lips twitched. She took his sheet of paper. She drew normal ears and a normal tail over his cat. She removed the extra leg. She gave it back. Daniel looked at it. The cat looked like a cat. He said, "Thank you." Lily nodded. Once. A small nod. Then she lowered her head back to her drawing. Daniel sat next to her and thought about how, in the canon, Adrian hadn't once set foot in the East Wing in 9 years. He'd never sat down next to her. He'd never noticed that Lily was drawing. The system showed 15 chrono points. His growth had stopped. The Morningstar house was a quiet place. Here, they didn't hate him. Here, they feared him. And fear was weak fuel. Soon, he would go to the academy. There would be hundreds of people who hated Adrian Morningstar for his name alone. There would be Ethan Carver and Ayla Ashford and dozens of others. There, chrono points would flow like a river. But there, the countdown would begin. Chapter 12, Public Humiliation. He had to be ready. Daniel spent 3 more points on his second edit. Memory. Not photographic, structural. He remembered the text of the novella in fragments, scenes, dialogues, plot twists, but there were gaps between them. Now the gaps were filling in, slowly, like water seeping through cracks. He recalled the details of Chapter 6, the maid and the whip. He'd already discarded the whip. That scene wouldn't happen. He recalled the details of Chapter 9, the first confrontation with Ethan in the academy hallway. Adrian calls him a mongrel. Ethan strikes him. The crowd cheers. That can be rewritten. He recalled the details of the 12th, the debutante ball. Adrian insults Princess Celeste in front of everyone. That's the turning point. After that, it's all downhill. That doesn't just need to be rewritten, it needs to be erased completely. He has 3 weeks until the academy, 3 months until the ball, 6 until the poison case, 12 points in reserve, and 1 red pen that recharges once a week. Not much, but enough for someone who knows the plot by heart. That evening, he went downstairs for dinner. 3 people at the table again. The Duke, Lily, Adrian. Daniel ate in silence. But when Lily reached for the bread and couldn't reach it, he silently moved the basket closer to her. A small movement, half a second. Lily took the bread. The Duke watched. He was silent. In his stony eyes, the same question. Who are you? Daniel couldn't answer. Not now. Maybe never. He finished his dinner. He went up to his room, lay down on the huge bed, closed his eyes, and a second before falling asleep, he felt something stir in his chest. Quietly, barely noticeable, as if something very large had turned over in its sleep. It didn't wake up. It just turned over. Daniel opened his eyes. Darkness. Silence. The fountain outside the window. He placed his hand on his chest. It was quiet beneath his ribs. Quiet again. He closed his eyes, forced himself to sleep. Tomorrow is a new day. The day after tomorrow is another, and so on until he reaches the ending that doesn't exist in the canon. The Morningstar carriage pulled up to the Royal Academy of Celestians at dawn. Daniel looked out the window. The building was exactly as he had imagined it when he had written the descriptions 3 years ago. White stone, spires bearing the flags of the 8 great houses. A wide staircase leading to the main entrance. The steps were crowded. Dozens of them, all in uniforms, bearing the crests of their houses. Daniel stepped out of the carriage, and the world around him changed. The system flashed. Chrono glasses, 16, 17, 19, 23. The stream came from all sides. Everyone who saw the silver hair and the Morningstar crest on the uniform felt something. Contempt, dislike, fear, disgust. Adrian Vale Morningstar, the heir to the house everyone hated, the most arrogant student in the academy's history, the one who called commoners filth, the one who beat servants, the one whose name was spoken like a curse. 23 points in 30 seconds. Just for stepping out of the carriage. Daniel walked down the steps and felt the hatred like the heat from a bonfire. It came from all sides, steady and constant. The system fed on it and grew. 30 points, 35. Somewhere deep in his chest, something stirred. Enough. Daniel clenched his teeth. Footnotes began to appear above the heads. He saw them clearly. Translucent lines of text, names, archetypes, key traumas, chapters of breakdown. The girl with red hair by the left column. Catherine Aldrich, archetype, echoed the crowd. Key trauma, rejection by mother, chapter of breakdown. 22, the tall guy with a sword at his belt by the fountain. Marcus Drake, archetype, hired bully. Key trauma, family debt, chapter of the break. 15. Daniel walked and read people like the table of contents of a book. Every heading in its place, every character in their role. He knew which of them would become Ethan's friend, who would betray him, who would die, who wouldn't make it to the end. He entered the main hall. High ceilings, stained glass windows, long tables. At the far wall, on a raised platform, stood the Academy Dean. an elderly mage with a white beard and weary eyes. Above him, a footnote. Dean Oliver Hancock. Archetype, blind guardian. Key trauma, inability to protect a student. Head of the fracture, 30th. Daniel walked to the table reserved for the senior aristocratic houses. He sat down. A void formed around him. The 2 chairs to his left were empty. 3 on the right were empty. No one wanted to sit next to Morningstar. Chronoglasses, 42. He sat in silence and waited. 10 minutes later, Ethan Carver entered the hall. Daniel recognized him immediately. Short, broad-shouldered, dark hair, plain clothes without a coat of arms, a battered sword at his belt, an open, honest face, the face of a man who doesn't know how to lie, the face of the main character, a footnote above him. Ethan Carver, archetype, rising star, key trauma, mother's death, the breaking point. No. Daniel blinked. The breaking point was missing. The main character had no breaking point. His arc went only upward. Of course, that's how it's written. Ethan found a place among the common folk, sat down, started talking to his neighbor, easily, simple, like breathing. Daniel watched. In the canon, this scene ended with Adrian approaching Ethan and loudly calling him a rootless mongrel. Ethan stood up. He fought back. The crowd cheered. The first spark of hostility, the beginning of Adrian's downfall. Daniel knew the schedule. It was supposed to happen today, in this hall, in the next half hour. He stood up. He walked over to the commoners' table. Silence spread through the hall like ripples on water. Everyone was watching. Morningstar is going to the outcasts. Morningstar is going to Carver. Something is about to happen. Ethan raised his head. He saw silver hair. He saw the coat of arms. His face hardened. His fists clenched. He was ready for the insult. The entire hall was ready. Daniel stopped 2 steps away. He looked at Ethan, then at his sword. The balance was indeed off. Half a finger toward the guard. The author described this in chapter 14, when Ethan finally got a proper weapon and realized the difference. But chapter 14 hadn't come yet, and Ethan didn't know. Daniel said that his sword's balance was shifted half a finger toward the guard, that if he had it reground, the strike would be faster, and he left without adding a word, without turning back. Ethan stood with his mouth open. The hall was silent. Someone coughed. Someone dropped a spoon. Daniel returned to his table. He sat down. In front of him, there was still an empty space 5 chairs wide on either side. But the silence was different. Before, it had been the silence before the blow. Now, it was the silence of incomprehension. The system flashed. Chrono points, 38, down. 4 people in the room had stopped hating him. They hadn't started loving him. They had simply stopped hating him. And that was enough for the pressure to ease. Daniel smiled to himself. Every act of normal human behavior cost him points, but every act of cruelty would have earned him hundreds. The system had been designed for a villain. It wanted him to be a villain. He had no intention of being one. After the ceremony, Daniel was assigned a room in the North Wing, a single room. Aristocrats were entitled to separate quarters. He unpacked his things, sat down on the bed, opened the system interface. 38 points. Enough for a few edits, but he couldn't spend them thoughtlessly. Every major expenditure stirred the essence. He could feel it. After the first edit, a stirring in his chest. After the second, a little stronger. Spend sparingly. Save. Conserve. He stood up and walked to the window. Down in the courtyard, Ethan Carver was examining his sword. He was twirling it in his hands, checking the balance. Daniel saw him frown. Then he looked up at the windows of the north wing. He didn't find the one he was looking for. He turned away. Daniel stepped away from the window. The first day at the academy. In the canon, this day ended with a fight and the first enemy. In his version, the day ends with silence and one bewildered hero. Not bad for the first edit, but this is only the beginning. Classes start tomorrow. Tomorrow, he'll meet Ayla Ashford. He remembered her from the canon, sharp as a shard. She's despised all the Morningstars since birth. Her younger brother died of a disease the Morningstars could have cured, but refused to. She hates Adrian personally, and she's the one who'll kill him in chapter 41. The footnote above her will be interesting. Daniel lay down on the bed. He closed his eyes. His chest was quiet for now. The first class was on aspect theory. Daniel sat in the lecture hall and listened to the lecturer. Professor Vernon, short, skinny, monotonous voice. A footnote above him, Arhady, safe observer. Key trauma, loss of a student during practice. Breaking point, no. Another character without a breaking point, a rarity. The lecture was about the nature of the magical elements. Every aristocrat is born with one aspect: fire, ice, lightning, earth, wind, shadow, light, void. 8 aspects, 8 great houses. Each house has honed its element for centuries through selective breeding. The purer the blood, the more powerful the aspect. Daniel listened and simultaneously recalled that Adrian's aspect was shadow, a powerful one of the strongest of his generation. In the canon, Adrian used shadow for underhanded backstabs and stealth attacks. Daniel hadn't touched magic yet. He didn't know how. His body remembered, but he couldn't find the switch. He sat in the 3rd row and took notes, real notes, lecture notes. None of the aristocrats took notes. It was considered beneath their dignity. Daniel took notes because he needed every scrap of knowledge about magic so he could later enhance his skills through edits. The girl next to him glanced at his notes, then at him. Then she moved away. Morningstar is taking notes. Another reason for suspicion. After the lecture, there was a fencing workshop. In the courtyard, wooden swords. The instructor was a knight from the Order of the Iron Leaf, broad-shouldered, scars on his arms. Daniel picked up a wooden sword and realized he didn't know how to use it. Adrian did. His body remembered the stances and basic strikes, but Daniel couldn't string those movements together. Muscle memory without conscious control. Like playing the piano blindfolded. First sparring match. They pitted him against a guy from House Crane. Intermediate level. In the canon, Adrian would have defeated such opponents without even looking. Daniel lost in 30 seconds. The wooden sword flew out of his hand. A blow to the shoulder. A blow to the thigh. He lay on the ground and stared at the sky. Silence all around. Then snickers. Morningstar had lost. Morningstar lay in the dust. The snickers turned into laughter. The system flared up. Chrono points. 45, 50, 53. The crowd's contempt poured out in a torrent. Adrian Morningstar was humiliated. Adrian Morningstar was weak. It was delicious to the system. Very delicious. Deep in his chest, something stirred. It moved. It reached toward the torrent as if toward food. Daniel stood up. He brushed off his uniform. He raised his sword and asked for a rematch. Silence. The instructor looked at him with interest. The guy from House Crane shrugged. He took his stance. Second sparring match. Daniel lost in 40 seconds. Progress. Third sparring match. 1 minute. He was starting to feel his body. finding the connection between what his muscles remembered and what his mind decided. Fourth, 1 minute 20 seconds. He didn't win, but he held his own. The guy from the cranes wasn't laughing anymore. Daniel lost 7 sparring matches in a row. He got up 7 times. After the 7th, the instructor stopped him and said that was enough for today. Daniel nodded. His shirt was covered in dust. His knuckles were bruised. His knee ached. The system showed 71 chrono points. A record day. The contempt was generous. He walked out of the courtyard and bumped into her. Ayla Ashford was standing by a column with her arms crossed over her chest. Dark hair, green eyes, a face so beautiful that he wanted to look away because the beauty was sharp, like the edge of broken glass. A footnote flashed above her. Ayla Ashford, archetype, avenger, key trauma, death of younger brother, breaking point, 41, the same chapter in which she kills Adrian. Her breaking point is his death. Interesting, she was looking at him, her gaze direct, without fear, without embarrassment, pure cold hatred, like ice at the bottom of a lake. The system froze for a second. Then the chrono goggles jumped. 75, 78, 81. She alone gave more than a whole courtyard of students because her hatred was not fleeting. It had been cultivated, nurtured over the years. She didn't hate Adrian. She hated the Morningstars. All of them. For her brother, for every day without him, for every evening when his bed remained empty. Ayla said one sentence. She said she was surprised at how low the Morningstars had sunk if they were losing to Crane. Her voice was steady. Quiet. Every word, like a needle prick. Daniel looked at her. He knew everything about her, knew about her brother, knew his name was Elliot. He knew he was 6. He knew the illness was called moon fever. He knew the Morningstar doctors could have cured it in 3 days, but Duke Renard refused because the Ashfords had voted against the Morningstars in the Council of Houses at the time. Politics, a dead 6-year-old boy for the sake of a political vote. Daniel knew all of this, and he couldn't say a word because Adrian shouldn't know this. He answered briefly, said that Crane was a good fighter and that he had something to learn. Ayla blinked. A single quick flutter of her eyelashes. She had expected something else. She had expected arrogance. She had expected an insult. She was waiting for a reason to lash out. He gave her no reason. She turned and walked away. Her heels clacked against the stone, steady and angry. 84 chrono points. Daniel watched her go and thought. In the canon, Ayla and Adrian had hated each other from day one. Their feud was the fuel of the plot. Without it, the story stalled. Now he hadn't let that fire flare up, but he hadn't extinguished it either. Ayla would go home and hate him just as much as she had yesterday. Nothing had changed. Yet, that evening, Daniel sat in the library, alone, reading a textbook on aspect theory, trying to understand how the shadow works. The description was vague. The shadow is the absence of light and form. It doesn't attack directly. It absorbs, distorts, hides. A powerful master of the shadow can become invisible. A very powerful one can dissolve an opponent's aspect into the shadows, temporarily depriving the enemy of magic for a time. Adrian was very powerful in the canon. Daniel couldn't even ignite a spark yet. He closed the textbook and spent 10 chrono points on a modification. The third one, skill enhancement, understanding magical systems. Not magic itself, theory, structure, how it works. As an editor, he had worked for years with texts on magical systems, hard systems, soft ones, with and without restrictions. He knew how they were built, how balance worked. Now that knowledge had deepened, sharpened. He opened the textbook again, read the same page, and saw what he hadn't seen a minute ago. An aspect isn't just an element. It's a channel, a pipe through which power flows. The width of the pipe depends on blood. The purer the blood, the wider the channel. Adrian's channel is wide, very wide, but Daniel isn't Adrian. He didn't know how to turn on the tap. He closed his eyes, reached inward, into the darkness beneath his ribs. There was something, not the essence, something else. The essence slept deeper, and here, on the surface, was a shadow. His aspect. He felt it as cold, like that first chill when he woke up in a foreign body. Only now the cold had a form. It was liquid, fluid. It flowed between his fingers and melted. Daniel opened his eyes. He looked at his hand. A shadow trembled at his fingertips. Not his shadow, not the shadow of the candle. A shadow that lived on its own, small, faint, but real. He clenched his fist. The shadow vanished. His heart was pounding. This was the first step. Tiny, but the first. He could do it. He needed time, and he needed chrono glasses, and he needed the world around him to keep hating him just enough to feed the system, but not enough to kill him before his time. Balance, like in good editing, like in a good story. He stepped out of the library. The hallway was dark. A figure stood by the window, small. A girl. No, a young woman. Blonde hair, big eyes, a footnote above her. Celeste Aveline Dryden. Archetype, a solitary crown, a key trauma, a lack of choice. Chapter of ruin, 26. Princess. Daniel stopped. Celeste turned toward him. A polite smile graced her face. Perfect. Flawless. Dead. She greeted him by title. Lord Morningstar. Her voice was even, neither warm nor cold. The perfect balance of propriety. Daniel nodded. He greeted her. Your Highness. And he walked on. He didn't stop. He didn't start a conversation. In the canon, Adrian, upon his first meeting with Celeste, he immediately began to demonstrate his superiority. He showed that he considered himself worthy of her hand. He was pushy. He was unpleasant. Daniel simply walked past. Celeste watched him go. Something flashed across her face. Not a smile, not surprise, interest, tiny, fleeting, and it vanished immediately behind a polite mask. Daniel didn't turn around. He knew that the canon Adrian would have turned around, so he didn't. He walked to his room, closed the door. He lay down on the bed. The system showed 61 chrono points after expenses. Enough for today. Tomorrow, new classes, new faces, new waves of hatred, and new chances to rewrite the scenes leading to his death. He closed his eyes. It was quiet in his chest. The essence slept. The shadow on his fingertips was fading. Daniel Kahn lay in the body of a villain in a world that wanted to destroy him, thinking that tomorrow he mustn't forget to check the schedule for the debutante ball. There was still time before Chapter 12. But time in this world moved faster than in the canon, and the plot wasn't going to wait. By his second week at the academy, Daniel had worked out a routine. Lectures in the morning, practice in the afternoon, evening, the library, night, planning. He got up before everyone else and went to bed after everyone else. Adrian's body wasn't used to such a regimen. It was pampered and weak. His muscles ached after every practice session. His joints creaked, but Daniel didn't stop. Every day he lost at fencing. Every day he got up. Every day the hall's contempt fed the system. By the end of the second week, he had 140 chrono points. He spent them carefully, in small portions, 5 at a time, 10 at a time. The Fourth Amendment went toward body coordination, not strength, not speed, just the connection between what he wanted to do and what his arms and legs were doing. The fifth revision went toward a deeper understanding of the shadow aspect. Theory, principles, the logic of the flow. He didn't get stronger, but he got more precise. The shadow at his fingertips no longer faded. It held, thin as a thread, but steady. Every morning before breakfast, he trained in his room. He closed his eyes, he reached for the cold beneath his ribs, and pulled the shadow out. First onto his fingers, then onto his palm, then onto his forearm. Slowly, like learning to walk all over again. In the third week, what he had both waited for and feared happened. Ethan Carver approached him. It happened after lunch in the hallway by the window. Ethan stopped 2 steps away. His face was serious, hands at his sides, not an aggressive stance, but a ready one. He said he'd checked the sword, that Daniel was right, the balance was off. He'd taken the sword to the academy blacksmith, and the man had confirmed it, half a finger's width toward the guard. Ethan asked how Morningstar knew such things. Daniel replied that he'd read a book on a lie. He knew it from the text of the novella, but the lie sounded convincing. Ethan looked at him for a long time. In his eyes was what Daniel saw on the faces of everyone around him. Incomprehension. Morningstar helped. Morningstar didn't insult him. Morningstar gave useful advice. It didn't add up. Ethan nodded. He said thank you and left, briefly, simply, without a word. The system showed a -2 points from Ethan. He had stopped hating Adrian by 2 points, a small price for a big investment. Daniel knew that this moment would change everything. In the canon, Ethan and Adrian were already enemies by this point. 2 skirmishes, 1 fight, a public insult. None of that happened here, and the story sensed it. Daniel noticed it by the 4th week. Little things. Coincidences that weren't coincidences. On the stairs, a servant stumbled in front of him and spilled ink on his uniform. In the dining hall, someone slipped him a plate of spoiled food. During the aspects workshop, the instructor unexpectedly paired him with the strongest fire mage in the class. Provocations, small nudges, as if someone invisible were pushing Daniel toward conflict, wanted him to snap, to strike out, to insult, to become the Adrian everyone was waiting for, the will of the narrative. Daniel felt it like the pressure of the air before a storm. The plot was trying to correct itself, to get the characters back on track, to put the villain in the villain's place. And every time Daniel didn't give in, the pressure grew. By the 5th week, the pressure had found a tool. Marcus Drake, a hired bully. Daniel had seen his footnote on the first day, an archetype, a hired bully, a key trauma, a family debt. The head of the pack. 15th. In the canon, Marcus was the one who started conflicts for Adrian, a dog on a leash, only now the leash had loosened and Marcus was getting nervous. The master wasn't giving orders. The master wasn't demanding that commoners be beaten up. The master was taking notes on lectures and losing sparring matches. Something had broken. Marcus decided to fix it himself. He walked up to Ethan in the hallway and shoved him with his shoulder. He loudly called him a bastard. He spat at his feet. He said Morningstar had ordered him to deliver a message. A lie. Daniel hadn't ordered anything. But Marcus acted out of habit, out of routine, according to the script that was woven into his archetype. Ethan didn't respond. He clenched his fists, but he didn't strike because there was a crack in his mind. Morningstar had helped him with the sword. Morningstar hadn't insulted him, and suddenly Morningstar orders him to be humiliated. It doesn't add up. Daniel found out about the incident an hour later. Sadie wrote him a note. She sent short letters from the estate every week. How are things? What's new? Lily drew another cat, but this time the note was from Yuna Song. The investigator, she handled cases within the academy, minor conflicts, disciplinary violations. The note stated that a complaint had been filed against Lord Morningstar by student Ethan Carver, an incident in the hallway, insult through an intermediary. Daniel read the note twice. Then he went to look for Marcus D. He found him in the courtyard behind the barracks. Marcus was standing with two friends. He saw Daniel. He stood up straight. His face bore the familiar readiness, waiting for orders. Daniel stopped in front of him, looked him in the eyes. A footnote hovered over Marcus. Key trauma, family debt. Daniel knew what that meant. The Drake family owed the Morningstars. Marcus served Adrian not out of friendship, but out of duty, through a chain that ran from father to grandfather to great-grandfather. Daniel said two things. First, he hadn't ordered Marcus to lay a hand on Carver. Second, the Drake family's debt to the Morningstars was hereby nullified. Marcus turned pale. The friends exchanged glances. Only the head of the house or the heir could nullify a family debt. Daniel was the heir. Formally, he had the right. Marcus asked why. Daniel replied that a debt that forces a person to humiliate others is not a debt, but a leash, and that he does not keep people on leashes. Marcus stood there, motionless. His world was crumbling. Everything he knew about the Morningstars, everything his father had told him, everything was falling apart. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, said he didn't understand. Daniel replied that it was normal and left. The system flashed. -5 points. Marcus stopped being afraid of him, didn't start to love him, didn't start to respect him, but the fear was gone, and the flow from him had dried up. Daniel walked down the hallway and counted his losses. Every person he freed from hatred cost him points. Every time. Every single one. But he kept going, because if he stopped, he would become the Adrian this world is waiting for, and that Adrian dies in chapter 41. That evening, he wrote a reply to Unisong. Briefly, the incident with Carver had occurred without his knowledge. He had sorted it out. The culprit was no longer a problem. Signed, Adrian Vale Morningstar. He put down his pen and looked at the signature. A stranger's name. A stranger's handwriting. A stranger's life, but the responsibility was real. Somewhere on the estate, Lily was drawing cats. Somewhere in the hallway, Sadie was brewing jasmine tea. Somewhere in the training yard, Ethan Carver was twirling a sword and frowning. Somewhere, Ayla Ashford was sharpening her hatred like a blade. 6 weeks until the debutante ball, 6 weeks to rewrite the 12th chapter. Daniel blew out the candle. In the darkness, the system flickered quietly. 123 chrono points. That should be enough. It has to be. 3 weeks before the ball, Daniel began to prepare. Not for the dancing, not for the costume, to survive. In the canon, the debutante ball was a turning point. Chapter 12. Adrian Morningstar approaches Princess Celeste in front of everyone and utters a phrase that makes the hall fall silent. He calls her a decoration without a purpose. Publicly, loudly, in front of all the great houses. Celeste turns pale. Ethan Carver steps into defense. The crowd erupts. Adrian is slapped by the princess herself. From that moment on, his reputation is ruined. Daniel remembered every word of that scene. He edited it 4 times. Each time, he told the author that the motivation was weak. Why does Adrian insult the princess? What does he hope to achieve by doing so? The author replied that Adrian is arrogant and stupid. Daniel objected. A villain shouldn't be dumb just for the sake of the plot. The author didn't listen. The scene stayed, and now Daniel had to delete it. The problem was that deleting it wasn't enough. If he simply didn't insult Celeste, the plot would throw up another reason. another provocation, another person. The narrative's will would not back down. It would find a way to bring Adrian down at the ball, so he needed to do more than just avoid the trap. He had to rewrite the entire scene so the trap had nowhere to take effect. Daniel thought about it for 3 days. Then he came up with a plan. A simple plan. So simple that the canonical Adrian would never have thought of it. Don't insult Celeste. Don't even approach her with talk of status or marriage. Instead, spend the entire evening discussing with her the only thing she truly loves: books. In the canon, this was mentioned in passing. Celeste loved books, old catalogs, rare editions, translations from ancient languages. That was her true passion, the only thing that was truly hers, not the crown. No one in the canon paid any attention to it, because a princess is supposed to be a reward for the hero, not a person with hobbies. Daniel did pay attention. He spent 2 weeks in the Academy Library, reading catalogs, memorizing rare editions, learning the names of authors and translators. He didn't become an expert. He became knowledgeable enough to hold a conversation. At the same time, he was preparing something else, a gift. In the canon, at the debutante ball, every heir to a great house presented the princess with a gift: jewelry, weapons, magical artifacts, expensive, meaningless things chosen to display wealth. In the canon, Adrian gave her a ruby necklace worth a village's annual income. Celeste accepted it with a forced smile and never wore it again. Daniel ordered a notebook from a bookbinder in town, a blank one, good paper, a leather cover, no embellishments, a single phrase embossed in silver on the cover. You can write whatever you want here. I won't be checking. The bookbinder looked at him suspiciously. Silver hair, the Morningstar coat of arms. The heir to a great house ordering a blank notebook for a princess. The world has finally gone mad. 2 weeks before the ball, something else happened. Daniel received a letter from home, from the Duke, short, businesslike. The Duke informed him that he would be attending the ball in person, that he expected the heir to behave appropriately, that the House of Morningstar could not afford any mistakes. Between the lines, Daniel read something else. The Duke was worried. He saw that his son had changed and didn't understand why. The letter was not an order. It was an attempt at contact. Clumsy, dry, but an attempt. Daniel wrote a reply, also short, also businesslike. He reported that his studies were going well, that there would be no problems with his behavior, and he added a single line at the end. He asked how Lily was. He sent it. The reply came 3 days later. 1 sentence. Lily is drawing. Daniel read it and smiled. For the first time in his life, Duke Renard Morningstar had written to his son about his youngest daughter. It wasn't information. It was a bridge, a thin one, a shaky one, but a bridge. A week before the ball, Daniel ran into Yuna Song, face to face. She was waiting for him at the library exit. Tall, straight back, short dark hair, an expressionless face. A footnote above her, Yuna Song, archetype, honest blade, key trauma, father's execution, chapter of brokenness. 35, she said. She'd received his letter, that she'd looked into the incident with Marcus Drake, that his account was sufficient. Case closed. Her voice was even, professional, but her eyes told a different story. She was studying him like a clue, like a piece of evidence that didn't fit the picture. Yuna asked why he had canceled the Drake's debt. Daniel replied that the debt was unjust. Yuna looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she said that injustice was not within the jurisdiction of the heirs of the great houses. Daniel replied that perhaps that was the problem. Yuna didn't answer, but something in her gaze had changed. Not sympathy, not trust, a record. She had filed his words in her internal database. marked them as an anomaly. She would return to this entry later. Daniel knew it. Yuna was an investigator. She didn't forget anomalies. In the canon, she was the one who gathered evidence against Adrian and brought him to the scaffold. Here, she was beginning to gather evidence of a different kind. Evidence that Adrian Morningstar was not who he claimed to be. Not in a bad way, in an incomprehensible way. And for Yuna, the incomprehensible was worse than the bad. The incomprehensible meant that she was missing something, and Yuna Song could not tolerate that. Daniel returned to the room. He sat down at the table. He counted his chrono points. 98. A high monthly expenditure, edits, coordination, memory, understanding of the aspect, reading people, 5 edits, 50 points. The gain was steady but slow. The Academy's mass contempt yielded 5 or 7 points a day. Ayla Ashford alone yielded just as much, but he couldn't go out of his way to get close to her. That would be manipulation, and manipulation was what the canonical Adrian did. Daniel didn't want to be the canon, even if being canon was more profitable. 1 week until the ball. Daniel took the notebook out of his desk drawer. He ran his finger over the cover. Empty pages inside. The cheapest and most expensive gift you could give to a person who has everything except freedom. He put the notebook back, lay down on the bed, closed his eyes. Something stirred in his chest, stronger than before, as if something had been pulled. He listened. Daniel clenched his teeth. 5 edits in 2 months. Each one awakened his essence a little more. Each one opened the door a little wider, but without the edits, he wouldn't survive. And with the edits, he might not survive for another reason. Balance. Balance again. He fell asleep with his hand on his chest, and he dreamed of a 7-year-old boy with silver hair who stood in the darkness and didn't cry. He just stood there and waited. The debutante ball. The Great Hall of the Celestian Academy was unrecognizable. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures created by the magic of the aspect, live flowers winding around the columns from floor to ceiling. Music poured down from somewhere above. Not instruments, the magic of sound, pure notes hanging in the air like glass spheres. Daniel stood at the entrance in a black uniform with silver embroidery. The Morningstar crest on his chest, hair slicked back, his face calm. Inside, panic. He had arrived early, on purpose, to survey the hall, to memorize the exits, to map out the routes, to figure out where the attack might come from. Because the attack would come. He didn't know where from, but he knew that the narrative's will would not let this moment slip by. The Debutante Ball, Chapter 12. The point of no return. The plot would bear down. Guests arrived in waves, heirs of the great houses, junior aristocrats, knights of the orders, diplomats, advisors. Each entrance was accompanied by an announcement of name and title. Daniel stood to the side and watched. Footnotes flickered above their heads. Dozens, archetypes, traumas, broken heads. He read the room like a book. Ethan Carver entered in a simple but clean uniform without a coat of arms. A girl walked beside him, 16 years old, blonde hair, a wide smile. Mirabelle Carver, the younger sister, an empty footnote. Like Sadie's, like Lily's, a minor character, no one in the canon. Mirabelle turned her head in all directions. Her eyes were huge. She had never been in a hall like this before. Everything around her shone. And she shone right back. Ayla Ashford entered in a dark green dress. Alone, unaccompanied, back straight, chin up. She didn't look around. She walked as if across a battlefield. The system jumped. plus 6 points in 30 seconds just for walking into the same hall. Duke Renard Morningstar was the last of the senior guests to arrive. He approached Daniel. He stood silently beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Daniel felt his presence like a weight, heavy, reliable, unfathomable. The Duke looked out into the hall and remained silent. Then he spoke a single sentence in a low voice. He said that no matter what happened tonight, the House of Morningstar stood behind its heir. Daniel looked at him. The footnote flickered. A broken father. Chapter 36. But right now, he wasn't broken. Right now, he stood beside a son he no longer understood and stood there anyway. Daniel nodded. He said, "Thank you." The Duke pressed his lips together slightly, as if he wanted to say something else. He didn't. He walked over to the other heads of houses. The princess's entrance was announced. Celeste Aveline Dryden descended the stairs in a white dress with silver embroidery. Her hair was styled a tiara, a smile, perfect, flawless, dead. The same smile as in the hallway. Daniel saw her and knew there was nothing beneath that smile, not emptiness, weariness. Celeste had grown tired of smiling 20 years ago and hadn't stopped since. The exchange of gifts began. Each heir approached the princess, bowed, presented a gift. Celeste accepted it, thanked them, smiled. A ruby bracelet from House Crane, a silver fan from House Aldrich, a magic crystal from House Valcroft. Ayla Ashford presented a dagger of black steel, beautiful and deadly. Celeste accepted it with the same dead smile. It was the Morningstar's turn. The hall fell silent. Everyone waited. A ruby necklace, a display of wealth, and then an insult. Everyone knew there would be an insult, yet expected it. The narrative's will was crushing. Daniel felt it like a ringing in his ears. Every step toward the princess was an effort. As if the air had grown thicker, as if something were trying to steer him in the other direction, toward that line, toward that word, an ornament without a purpose. He approached Celeste. He bowed. He pulled a notebook from his breast pocket. Not a box, not a case, a notebook, leather cover, no embellishments, silver lettering. He held it out. Celeste took it. She looked at the cover. She read it. "You can write whatever you want here. I won't be checking." The dead smile wavered. It didn't disappear. It didn't turn into a real one. It just wavered, like glass hit by a pebble, a small crack. She looked up at Daniel. There was something in her eyes, not gratitude, not surprise, a question. She asked what it was. Daniel replied that it was a notebook, empty, for her. Celeste held the notebook with both hands. Her fingers turned slightly white. She clutched it. The room was silent. Everyone waited for what would come next. An insult, but there was no insult. Daniel said he'd heard that Your Highness was interested in rare editions and that he'd recently found a catalog of Third Blossom era translations in the Academy Library that had been mistakenly marked as lost. Celeste blinked. Her dead smile came alive for half a second. The Third Blossom catalog. She knew about it. She had been looking for it for 3 years. She asked where exactly he had found it. Daniel answered, 3rd floor, restricted access section, shelf 12 Chata, behind the double spine of the reference book on agrarian magic. Celeste looked at him with a genuine gaze for the first time that evening, for the first time in a long time. She forgot about the tiara and the hall and the hundreds of people around her. She heard only the words about the catalog and the shelf and the restricted access section, and that was what Daniel had been aiming for. Not admiration, not infatuation, interest, human interest in a person who had noticed what was important to her, not to her title. They talked for 20 minutes, standing by a column, discussing translations and catalogs and rare editions. Celeste asked questions. Real questions, not ritualistic ones. Daniel answered, "Not everything." He wasn't an expert, but he knew enough not to stay silent or lie. The hall watched. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Morningstar is talking to the princess, not insulting her, talking about books. Someone giggled, someone frowned. Ayla Ashford stood by the opposite wall and watched them intently. Her face was stony. The system showed a +4 points from her. She hated him, even for not doing anything wrong. Because Morningstar wasn't supposed to do anything good. It disrupted the natural order. It disrupted her worldview. And her worldview was the only thing she had left after Elliot's death. Daniel saw it. And there was nothing he could do about it. Yet. The evening wore on. Music played. People danced. Daniel didn't dance. He stood by the wall, watching, waiting for the blow. The blow came half an hour before the end. A servant brought him a glass of wine. Daniel looked at the wine. Dark red, thick, with a barely noticeable bluish tint at the rim. Aconite. He knew that hue from chapter 14. The Ashfords love aconite. Daniel didn't drink it. He set the glass on the windowsill. He found Ayla with his eyes. She was standing in the same spot. Her face was inscrutable, but her hands were clenched slightly. She knew about the wine, or maybe not. Maybe it wasn't her plan. Maybe it was her father's. Lord Cedric Ashford, the man who, 20 years ago, had made a pact with whatever was inside Adrian. Who knew that the Adrian of today wasn't the same one, and who wanted to eliminate the problem? Daniel set the glass down on the windowsill. The evening had ended without incident. Chapter 12 had not come to pass. There was no public humiliation, no insult, no slap. Instead, there was a conversation about books and an empty notebook and a glass of poisoned wine that no one had drunk. Daniel returned to the room. He took off his uniform. He sat down on the bed. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from tension. He had held himself together for 6 hours. 6 hours of perfect control. 6 hours of fighting against the narrative's will, which pressed and pressed and pressed. He had won. He had won today, but the plot wouldn't give up. The ball was just 1 point. Ahead lay the poison case. Ahead lay the tournament. Ahead lay everything else. The system showed 111 chronopoints. The ball had earned him a lot. The hall's contempt, Ayla's hatred, the fear of those who didn't understand. It all went into the bank. Daniel lay down. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 2 months, he fell asleep without fear. Because 1 chapter is behind him, 1 point of no return has been passed, and he is still alive. After the ball, the world changed. Not immediately, not loudly, quietly, like a crack in the wall that spreads at night. The academy students whispered. Morningstar hadn't insulted the princess. Morningstar had given her a notebook, an empty notebook. Some considered it mockery, others a provocation. Still, others simply didn't understand. But no one considered it kindness, because Morningstars aren't kind. It's a law of nature. Daniel paid no attention to the whispers. He had more serious matters to attend to. In 4 months, the poison case. In the canon, it worked like this. Whoever planted a vial of poison on Adrian and framed him, he was accused of attempting to poison the crown prince. Adrian couldn't prove his innocence. The Duke stripped him of his inheritance to save the house. Adrian went downhill from there. Daniel knew the name of the plant. Victor Lane, the youngest son of the Lane. Vassals of the Ashfords. A quiet, unassuming man with a smile that was always a little wider than necessary. In the canon, he appeared 3 times. He planted the poison. He testified. He disappeared. The perfect tool. Daniel found him in the library. Victor was sitting alone in a corner behind a stack of books on alchemy, a footnote above him. Victor Lane. Archetype, a hidden pawn, a key trauma, rejection by his father. Chapter of the break, the 20th. Daniel sat down across from him. Victor looked up. He saw silver hair. His face didn't flicker. A professional. Well-trained. Daniel spoke quietly. He didn't threaten. He didn't pressure. He asked Victor how he was getting along in the Ashford's shadow. Victor replied that he didn't understand the question. Daniel asked if he knew that Lord Cedric planned to use him as a disposable tool, that once he'd completed the task, they'd dispose of him. Because a dead witness doesn't testify. Victor turned pale by half a shade, barely noticeable. But Daniel saw it. His heightened powers of observation caught every micro-shift. Dilated pupils, a rapid pulse in his neck, fingers gripping the pen a little tighter. He'd hit the mark. Victor asked how Morningstar knew about this. Daniel replied that the Morningstars cast a long shadow, and that one could see a great deal in that shadow. Beautiful. Ambiguous. Useless as evidence, but enough to sow doubt. Victor was silent for 30 seconds. Then he asked what Morningstar wanted. Daniel answered. He wanted nothing. Not a favor, not loyalty, not information. He wants to offer a choice. Victor can continue working for Cedric and end up dead in a ditch in 4 months. Or he can leave the Ashfords. Daniel will provide him with the protection of the House of Morningstar. Not as a servant, as a guest. With the right to leave at any moment, Victor looked at him for a long time. A minute, 2. Then he asked why Morningstar would do this. Daniel answered honestly, because he didn't want anyone to be used and discarded. Victor smirked. He said it sounded like a trap. Daniel agreed. He said yes, it did, but traps usually don't offer a way out before they snap shut. Victor stood up, gathered his books, and left without saying another word. The system showed 0 points from him. Victor didn't hate Adrian. He wasn't afraid of him. He didn't despise him. He was a professional. To him, Adrian was a task, not a person. Daniel didn't know if his proposal would work, but the seed had been planted. Now he had to wait. A week passed. 2. 3. Victor didn't come, didn't write, didn't give any sign. Daniel began to think he had lost this round. In the 4th week, a note appeared under his door. Unsigned, 1 sentence, a list of names, 3 names. People Cedric Ashford had recruited inside the academy for the poison operation. Victor Lane had made his choice. Daniel read the names, memorized them, burned the note, and got to work. 3 Ashford agents inside the academy. He could have gone to Unisong and turned them in. It would have been simple and effective, but it would have destroyed Victor. An informant burns out after the very first use. Daniel chose a different path. He began observing the 3 agents without interfering, without getting close. Just watching, memorizing their routes, their habits, their contacts, schedules. He was preparing an interception. When the poison was planted, he would know by whom, when, and where, and he would have time to remove it before anyone noticed. At the same time, he continued his normal life, classes, sparring, the library. His fencing was improving. The 6th Amendment focused on muscle coordination, and he stopped losing in 30 seconds. Now, he lost in 3 minutes, sometimes in 5. Once he fought to a draw with a guy from Aldrich House. Progress was slow but steady. The shadow aspect was growing too. Daniel trained every morning. The shadow covered his entire palm. He learned to stretch it into a thin thread and hide small objects. A coin, a feather, a key, not for combat, everyday use. But every step forward gave him greater understanding. Celeste Dryden had started greeting him in the hallways, not formally, by name. Lord Adrian, not Lord Morningstar, by name. It was a breach of protocol. A princess does not address the heir of an enemy house by name, but Celeste did, quietly, when no one was listening. Once she stopped him after a lecture and said she'd found the catalog, 3rd floor, restricted access section, shelf 12, right where he'd said she'd been looking for it for 3 years. It turned up one evening after her conversation with Adrian. She said she'd started writing in a notebook. Daniel asked what exactly. Celeste looked at him, and for the first time in all their time together, she smiled genuinely. A small smile. Lively. She said he'd promised not to check. Daniel nodded, said he'd promised, and didn't ask again. The system. -3 points. Celeste was starting to stop hating him. She wasn't starting to love him. She was just stopping hating him. And every point she gave up was worth more than 10 from a random student. Because Celeste was a princess. And her opinion changed the opinions of dozens of people around her. A chain reaction. Less hatred from her. Less hatred from those who looked at her. Fewer chrono points. Daniel knew what he was getting into, and he went for it. At night, he lay in bed and counted 102 points. 6 edits spent. Ahead lay the case involving poisons. Ahead lay a trap he had to intercept. Ahead lay Cedric Ashford, who realized that Adrian wasn't Adrian and was ready to kill him. Something turned in his chest, heavy, slow, like a millstone. The entity was waking up bit by bit. Every correction roused it. Every stream of chrono points fed it. The system was a feeding trough. He'd known that from day one, but there was no choice. Without the system, he'd be dead in a year. With the system, he'd be dead in a little over a year. His only chance was to become strong enough, fast enough, and in doing so, not to wake what lay dormant. Balance. Always balance. He closed his eyes, and in his dream, he saw the silver-haired boy again. The boy stood in the darkness. He wasn't crying. He wasn't calling out. He was just standing there. But this time, he held out his hand. Daniel tried to take it. He couldn't reach it. He woke up with the taste of blood in his mouth. The first time, not the last. The winter festival at the academy came sooner than Daniel had expected. 3 months had flown by. Snow had wrapped Celestian in a white blanket. The spires of the academy glistened with frost. In the courtyard, students were building ice sculptures with magic and their hands. Daniel stood by the window and looked out at the courtyard. In 2 weeks, the case involving the poisons. He had been watching the 3 Ashford agents every day. He knew their routes by heart. He knew when each of them stepped away. He knew where they hid their correspondence. He was ready, but first, the winter festival. Tradition. Each student draws the name of a random classmate and gives them a gift. Anonymously or in person. Their choice. Daniel drew a name. He unfolded the paper. Ethan Carver. He stood there with the paper in his hand for 30 seconds. Then he said quietly that it was, of course, Ethan Carver. Who else? The system remained silent. It didn't care. Daniel thought about it for 2 days. Then he made a list. A whetstone, a good one. Made of gray slate, for a fine sharpening. Hand ointment for calluses. Ethan trained with his sword every day, and his palms were cracked. Daniel had seen it during the practical sessions, and a note, a short one, no unnecessary words. He ordered everything through the town merchant. The whetstone cost 3 silver coins, the ointment 2. He wrote the note himself. Your sword's balance is off by half a finger. I ordered a new guard from the blacksmith to fit your hand. It will be ready by spring. Happy Winter Festival, Carver. Signed, Morningstar. He really did order the guard. He found a blacksmith in town who specializes in custom orders. He described the specifications: grip width, finger length, arm weight. He calculated all of this by watching how Ethan held the sword during practice. 4 observation sessions, 6 chrono points to enhance visual memory. The guard will be perfect. Winter festival evening, great hall, tables pushed aside, garlands of magical fire, food, lots of food, music, laughter. Daniel stood by a column with a leather case in his hand. Ethan sat among his own. Mira was nearby. She was eating a sweet pastry with such delight as if it were the best thing that had happened to her in a year. Maybe it was. Daniel approached. Silence rippled out from his footsteps, as always. Morningstar is coming to Carver. Again. Everyone waited. Someone stood up. Someone placed a hand on their sword, just in case. Daniel silently handed Ethan a leather case. Ethan looked at him, at the case. Back at him. He took it, opened it. A whetstone, ointment, a note. He read the note. His face changed. Disbelief, confusion. Something else Daniel didn't know the name of. Ethan raised his head and looked at him for a long time. The silence in the room became absolute. Then Ethan said Daniel was strange. Daniel shrugged. He replied that he was working on it. Ethan snorted. He didn't smirk. He didn't laugh. He snorted like a person caught off guard by something so unexpected that his body reacted before his mind. Mira, standing next to him, craned her neck to see what was in the case. She saw a whetstone, then some ointment, then a note. She looked up at Daniel and smiled widely, just like that, for no reason, because someone had done something nice for her brother, and that was enough. The system, -7 points. 7. A record drop in a single moment. 6 people in the room simultaneously stopped hating him. Not 6 random students. 6 people who were close to Ethan. His friends, his circle, people who trusted his opinion. Ethan didn't tell them that Morningstar was good. He didn't say anything, but they saw his face. They saw the snort. They saw that the world's main hero had forgotten to hate the villain for half a second. And that was enough. Daniel returned to his column. He stood. He watched. The system was slowly recovering its losses. The other students still hated him, but the stream had thinned. Every moment like that took a bite out of him. Half an hour later, Mira Carver approached him. She brought him a cupcake on a plate with frosting and said it was from her because no one had drawn his name in the lottery, but that was unfair, so there. Daniel looked at the cupcake. Then at Mira. She was 16, blonde hair. Her eyes were sparkling. She wasn't afraid of him, not at all, not one bit. She walked up to Morningstar, the very same Morningstar everyone was avoiding. She brought him a cupcake and stood there looking like someone who didn't understand why everyone around her was so tense. Daniel took the cupcake. He said thank you. Mira nodded and started talking. She talked a lot and fast about the academy, about the snow, about how the pastries here are better than at home, about how she likes the library but doesn't like fencing because she has no magic and she's the only one in the family without an aspect, and everyone feels sorry for her, but she doesn't want pity. She wants them to stop patting her on the head and let her do something useful. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. She talked for 7 minutes without pausing, as if a dam had burst. Then she stopped. She blushed. She said she was sorry, that she talked too much. Everyone told her that. Daniel replied that no, she didn't, that she said exactly as much as was needed. And he asked one thing. He asked if she knew how to count. Mira blinked. She said yes, that she's good at counting, that she's the only one in the family who remembers all the prices at the market and always knows how much they spent for the week. Daniel nodded. He said he'd remember that. Mira smiled. She waved her hand. She ran back to Ethan. Daniel watched her go and thought about how, in the canon, she just once. One scene, 3 lines, the hero's younger sister, no magic, no role, no future. Here, she would have a future. He would make sure of that. The evening was coming to an end. The students were dispersing. Daniel walked down the hallway toward his room. Ayla Ashford was waiting for him at the turn. She stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, face cold. She said she'd seen his gift to Carver. Daniel stopped. Ayla said she didn't understand what he was doing. That Morningstar giving gifts to a commoner was either a trap or madness. Daniel replied that it might be both. Ayla didn't smile. She stepped closer. One step, her green eyes burned with a steady cold fire. She said her father was right, that something was wrong with Adrian Morningstar, that something had changed, and that she would find out what. The system. Plus 9 points. Ayla hated him with renewed intensity, not for his cruelty, for his unpredictability, because she knew how to defeat the cruel Morningstar. But she didn't understand this new, strange Morningstar, and that lack of understanding fueled her hatred better than any offense. She left. Her heels clacked against the stone. Daniel stood in the dark corridor. 104 chrono points, plus 9 from Ayla, minus 7 from the hall, minus 2 from Ethan. Total 0. 0 growth for the entire evening. Every step forward threw him back a step. Every friend cost him an enemy. Every warm word cooled the system. He entered the room, closed the door, sat down on the bed, and for the first time since his rebirth, he allowed himself to be tired. Just to be tired. No plans, no calculations, no strategy. Just sitting on the bed in a dark room and feeling how a foreign body ached from someone else's fatigue. It was quiet in his chest. The entity slept, but its sleep had grown lighter. Daniel could feel it. It tossed and turned more often, reached for the surface more often, like a fish rising from the bottom because it senses bait. The bait was the chrono goggles, his power. His survival. It was all one system. It was all one trap. And he sat in the center of that trap, handing out pastries. He lay down, closed his eyes. In 2 weeks, the case about the poisons. He's ready. He has to be ready. In the darkness behind his closed eyes, the silver-haired boy stood in the same spot, his hand outstretched, waiting. Daniel reached out to him, and this time he almost touched him. Almost. The poison case didn't start the way it did in the canon. In the canon, it was sudden. The vial was found in Adrian's room. The accusation fell like an axe. Here, Daniel had been waiting. He knew the names of the 3 agents. He knew their routes. He knew their schedules. 2 weeks of surveillance had given him the full picture. The first agent, a maid from the service wing, she had access to the students' rooms through cleaning duties. Second, the junior alchemist in the lab. He could make poison without raising suspicion. Third, a student from Valcroft House. He was supposed to be the witness, the one who would accidentally discover the vial and raise the alarm. A simple scheme, 3 links. Break one and the chain falls apart. Daniel chose the second link, the alchemist. His name was Garrett, a quiet man in his 30s with eyes perpetually red from working with reagents. Daniel came to him 3 days before the appointed time. He came at night, alone. Garrett was sitting in the lab, mixing something. He saw silver hair in the doorway. He startled. He knocked over a test tube. Daniel walked in and sat down in the chair across from him, calmly, as if he'd come to discuss homework. He told Garrett 3 things. First, he knows that Garrett is preparing poison on behalf of the House of Ashford. Second, he knows that Garrett was promised gold and the position of court alchemist. Third, he knows that Garrett will get neither because Cedric E. Ashford doesn't pay his tools. He throws them away. Garrett sat motionless, sweat on his temples, hands on his knees. He asked how Morningstar knew. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a scroll from his pocket. A contract. A real one. With the Morningstar house seal. The position of alchemist at the Morningstar estate. A salary, housing, protection, the only condition. Garrett would prepare the poison exactly as planned. Deliver it exactly on time. Hand it over to the maid exactly as agreed. But the vial would be empty. Water with food coloring, identical in appearance. When Valcroft finds the vial and raises the alarm, Yoonsong will conduct an analysis. The analysis will show water, the charges will fall apart, the setup artists will be disgraced, and in a week, Garrett will quietly resign and leave for the Morningstar estate. Garrett looked at the contract, then at Daniel. Then back at the contract, he asked why Morningstar wouldn't kill him. Why not hand him over to the guards? Why not destroy him? Daniel replied that a dead alchemist was useless, but a living, grateful alchemist was worth more than revenge. Garrett signed the contract. His hand was shaking. The ink smudged on the last letter, but the signature was there. Daniel took the scroll. He stood up and left. He stopped in the hallway, leaned against the wall. His heart was pounding. He had just recruited a man. Not like the canonical Adrian. Not through fear and threats. Through calculation and an offer he couldn't refuse. But the essence was the same. He had manipulated, exploited another's weakness, found a lever and pressed down. And that frightened him more than the entity in his chest, because the entity was foreign, but the manipulation was his own, honest, a skill honed by years of working with authors and texts. He knew how to find the weak spots in plots. Now he found the weak spots in people. The difference was that plots didn't cry. The poison case unfolded exactly according to plan. The following week, a maid slipped the vial into Adrian's room. A student from Valcroft discovered it during a chance visit. He raised Anne. The guards arrived. The dean arrived. Yuna Song arrived. The vial was seized. It was tested. Colored water. The room fell silent. The charges crumbled before their eyes. Yuna Song stood in the middle of the room with the empty vial in her hand, looking at Daniel. He stood calmly, hands behind his back, his face serene. He said he didn't understand what he was being accused of, that there was water in the flask and that he would be glad if the investigation determined who had planted that water in his room and why. Yuna looked at him for 5 seconds. A mechanism was at work in her eyes. The gears were turning. She saw the setup. She saw that Adrian was innocent, but she also saw that he wasn't surprised. Not surprised at all. He had been expecting this. He knew. And he had prepared. Yuna wasn't stupid. She understood that someone had outmaneuvered the framers, and the only one who had gained from it stood before her with a serene expression. She filed this away in her mental database. Another anomaly, another detail that didn't fit. The student from Valcroft turned pale when the analysis showed water. The maid disappeared from the academy that same day. Garrett submitted his resignation a week later. Quietly, no fuss, 3 links in the chain had broken. Cedric Ashford received the news 2 days later. Daniel hadn't seen his face, but he could picture it. The man who had been weaving intrigues for 20 years had lost a round to a boy who, by the book, was supposed to be lying in the mud and crying. It wasn't just a defeat. It was an insult, and a humiliated Cedric Ashford was dangerous. Far more dangerous than when he was calm. The system showed an increase, plus 22 points in a week. Cedric hated him from afar. His people at the academy hated him out of fear of exposure. The students who had waited for Morningstar's downfall and were disappointed hated him out of frustration. 126 chrono points. A good reserve, but that night, Daniel woke up with the taste of blood for the second time, stronger than the first. He sat up in bed in the dark. His mouth was full of an iron taste. He spat into his palm. Red, real blood. Not his blood. Blood that came from within, from the essence. It was feeding. Every chrono point he earned passed through it. He was a filter. The world's hatred flowed into the system. The system processed it into points. The points nourished him, but the byproduct, the waste, the slag, it all settled inside, feeding what lay dormant. Daniel wiped his mouth. He stood up. He walked over to the mirror. Adrian was staring at him with silver eyes. But for a split second, it seemed to him that the pupils had dilated just a little more than they should. A little darker, a little hungrier. He blinked. The pupils were normal. It was his imagination. Or maybe not. He turned away from the mirror, lay back down, and didn't fall asleep until morning. 3 months had passed since the poison case. Spring had come to Celestian with rain and a warm breeze. The snow had melted. The trees in the courtyard were covered in buds. Daniel made the most of those 3 months. Fencing. He no longer lost to everyone in a row. His body finally obeyed him. Adrian's muscle memory and Daniel's conscious control had found a point of connection. He didn't become the best swordsman at the academy. Far from it. But he stopped being the worst. Now he beat the average fencers and lost to the strong ones. A normal level for the heir to a great house who spent his childhood in the library rather than on the training grounds. The aspect of the shadow, the progress here was more significant. Daniel spent another 10 points on 2 modifications. The 7th was for a deep understanding of the flow of magic. The 8th was for control over the subtle manifestations of the aspect. The shadow now covered both his hands up to his elbows. He had learned to dissolve small objects completely into the shadow. A coin would vanish. It would reappear in his other hand. A key would vanish. It would appear in his pocket. Not combat techniques, tricks, but behind every trick lay a principle, and the principles formed a system. He was beginning to understand the shadow not as an element, but as a language. It had grammar, rules, exceptions. He learned this language just as he had learned Korean as a child. Slowly, stubbornly, word by word. The relationships around him were changing too. Celeste greeted him every day. Sometimes she stopped to talk. Twice they went to the library together. In silence, she read her catalogs. He read textbooks. They just sat at the same table. The silence between them was different, not empty, full, like the silence between people who don't need to fill the space with words. Ethan Carver received his guard. The blacksmith finished it by early spring. Ethan fitted it to his sword and trained with it for 3 days. Then he approached Daniel after practice. He said the guard was perfect, that the balance had changed, that for the first time he felt the sword as an extension of his arm and not as a stick with a handle. Daniel nodded. He said he was glad. Ethan stood there for another second. Then he asked why. Why was Morningstar helping him? Daniel replied that a good sword deserves a good guard. Ethan shook his head. He said that wasn't an answer. Daniel agreed. He said no. It wasn't an answer, but it was all he could offer right now. Ethan looked at him. There was no hostility left in his eyes, nor was there trust. There was something in between, like a person standing in front of a closed door, deciding whether to knock or walk away. He nodded and left. System -4. Mira Carver began to appear more often. She would approach Daniel in the library, in the dining hall, in the courtyard. She talked a lot. About everything. She talked about the price of bread in town and how the Academy's stable hand was shortchanging the treasurer by 3 copper coins a week, and how, if they sold the kitchen surplus to the student tavern across the wall, the Academy could save 200 silver coins a year. Daniel listened, and he nodded at every calculation she made, because she was right. Every time. Her mind worked like a calculating machine. Numbers were her language, just as the shadow was Adrian's language. 2 months after the poison case, Daniel offered her a job, not formally. He simply said that the Morningstar estate needed someone who could calculate better than all their managers put together, and that if she wanted, there would be a place for her after the Academy. Mira fell silent for the first time since they'd met. She stood there in silence for 10 seconds. Then she said that no one had ever offered her a job before. Everyone had offered pity. Daniel replied that pity wasn't in the estate's budget, but a good financial manager was. Mira smiled so widely that Daniel's eyes hurt. Lily sent letters every week, short ones, with drawings, cats, horses, once a dragon, crooked, with 6 legs. Standing next to the dragon was a man with silver hair. There was no signature. Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he put it in the desk drawer with the rest. Sadie wrote, too. Her letters were different, neat, cautious, every word carefully chosen. She reported on matters at the estate, about how the cook, Gilbert, had started preparing meals separately for Lily, without milk, about how the stable hand Tobias had recovered and returned to work, about how the Duke had started having dinner with Lily every evening, not in silence. He asks her questions about the drawings. Daniel read this and saw that the house was changing, slowly, painfully, like a ship turning against the wind. Barkanin sa yintutur kichun during. The Academy tournament was scheduled for late spring, the main event of the academic year. Students from all grades, fencing, magic, team battles, the final in front of the royal box. In the canon, this was the 3rd turning point. Adrian made it to the final against Ethan. He was losing. He was arrested on the old poisoning charge. End of the line. The beginning of the descent to the scaffold. Daniel knew the poisoning charge was dead. He'd buried it in the poisons case, but the arrest could have happened for another reason. The will of the narrative doesn't give up. It will find a new lever, a new reason, a new trap. So he doesn't just need to survive the tournament. He needs to rewrite it so the trap has nowhere to land. Daniel had a plan. Insane, simple, perfect. He won't fight Ethan in the final. He'll teach Ethan how to defeat whoever stands in the final in his place. The tournament began on the first day of summer. The stands were full, so the flags of the 8 houses fluttered in the wind. The royal box, the king, the queen, Princess Celeste in white, standing next to her father, Duke Renard Morningstar in the guest box, direct, stone-faced, eyes on his son. A small figure stood next to the Duke. Lily. She had come to the tournament. It was her first time leaving the estate in 2 years. Daniel saw her from the arena, and something tightened in his chest. Not his essence. Something else. Warm, the present. Lily was holding a rolled-up sheet of paper in her hands. A drawing. She had brought him a drawing. Daniel turned away. He focused. The tournament format was standard: qualifying bouts, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, fencing and magic combined, aspects allowed. Daniel made it through the first round. His opponent was weak, a third-year student from a minor house. Daniel won cleanly. A shadow slid across his opponent's blade and blurred his vision for a split second. That was enough. 1 strike. A clean victory. The hall did not applaud. The hall was silent. Morningstar had won. That was normal. What was abnormal was how he won. Quietly, quickly, without arrogance, without mocking the defeated. He extended a hand to his opponent and helped him up. The hall didn't know what to make of it. Round 2, a stronger opponent. The heiress of House Aldrich. The fire aspect. Fast, aggressive. Daniel lost, not on purpose. He lost fair and square. She was better. Her fire pierced his shadow. He couldn't block fast enough. 3 strikes and he was on the ground. The hall exhaled. Relief. Morningstar had lost. Order restored. System plus 11. Contempt and schadenfreude poured out in a flood. Daniel stood up, brushed himself off, bowed to his opponent, and he left the arena. His part of the tournament was over. Now the real work began. Ethan Carver was cutting through the tournament bracket like a knife through butter. Quarterfinals, victory, semifinals, victory. His opponents were falling one after another. The new guard was working. The sword's balance was perfect. Ethan moved as if he had been born with a blade in his hand. The hall roared. The hero was doing what a hero was supposed to do. He was winning. The final. Ethan Carver versus Crown Prince Leonard Dryden, Celesta's older brother. Tall, strong, an aspect of light. In the canon, Ethan lost this fight. Leonard was too strong. His light burned everything in its path. Ethan couldn't break through the defense. He was losing. He was falling. The arena cheered for the prince. A standard plot. The heir defeats the upstart. But Daniel rewrote this scene. 3 weeks before the tournament, he started showing up at Ethan's training sessions, not as a spectator, as an advisor. The first time, Ethan looked at him like he was crazy. Morningstar at his training session. Absurd. But Daniel didn't bother to explain. He just sat down by the wall and started watching. After training, he said one sentence. That Ethan opens his left side after the 3rd punch in a series. Every time, Ethan frowned. He tried it. He threw 3 punches and saw that, yes, his left side was open. He looked at Daniel. He said it was the first time he'd ever seen someone notice that from the outside. Daniel shrugged. He said that was his job, to notice. The next day, Ethan didn't send him away. On the 3rd day, he asked what else he saw. Daniel started talking. 3 weeks, every evening. He'd picked Ethan's style apart, piece by piece. He didn't teach him new techniques. He wasn't a master swordsman. He was an editor. He saw the structure. He saw the patterns. He saw the mistakes that kept repeating, and he saw the potential that Ethan wasn't using. He told Ethan about Crown Prince Leonard, about his aspect of light, about how the light creates a shield that seems impenetrable but has one weakness. Light doesn't work in the shadows. Literally, if Ethan forces close combat and makes Leonard fight in his shadow rather than at a distance, the aspect of light will weaken by 40%. Ethan asked how Daniel knew about the aspect of light's weakness. Daniel replied that he'd read it in a book. A lie. It from the canon. From chapter 23, where Ethan received this information from the old knight a year before their meeting. But the old knight hadn't appeared here yet, and Daniel had to step in as his substitute. The finale, the arena, Ethan Carver versus Leonard Dryden. The hall fell silent. The royal box was tense. Celeste gripped the armrest of her chair. She didn't know who to root for, her blood brother or the man who had given her the notebook. The fight began. Leonard struck with light. A blinding flash. The audience squinted. Ethan didn't squint. He lunged forward into Leonard's shadow where the light couldn't reach him. Leonard didn't expect it. No one did. Ethan forced a close-quarters fight, blade to blade, shadow to shadow. Leonard tried to create distance. Ethan wouldn't let him. He stayed close, breathing down his neck, every strike precise, every movement calculated. 3 weeks of training, 3 weeks of revisions, 3 weeks of work by an invisible editor. The fight lasted 7 minutes. Leonard took a blow to his right shoulder. He lost his balance. Ethan twisted his body and knocked the sword out of his hand with his blade. Silence absolute. The Crown Prince's sword clattered on the arena's stones. Ethan stood over him, blade raised. Victory. The hall erupted, roaring, stomping. Shouts. A commoner had defeated the Crown Prince. The main hero had done what he was supposed to do. Daniel stood by the wall, behind the stands. Out of sight. Not in the light. In the shadows. Where he was meant to be. He watched as Ethan raised his sword, as the arena chanted his name, as Celeste rose from her seat, as an expression appeared on her face that Daniel had never seen before. Not a dead smile, a living one, full, real. But she wasn't looking at Ethan. She looked past the arena to where Daniel stood, in the shadows behind the stands. She couldn't see him. The distance was too great, the shadows too thick. But she was looking right there, as if she knew. System -6. Daniel turned away. Something heavy twisted in his chest. The entity. It hadn't been sleeping. It had been watching. The entire tournament. Every fight. Every stream of chrono points. It fed and grew. Daniel felt it as a weight. Heavy. Constant. Like a stone suspended from his ribs from the inside. He stepped out into the courtyard. Air, sun, birds. The normal world. He stood and breathed. Behind him, the arena roared. A monster stirred in his chest. And somewhere between these two things stood he, Daniel Kahn, former editor, current villain, the man who had just given the main hero his greatest victory and asked for nothing in return. Lily approached him quietly. Small steps. She held out a folded sheet of paper. Daniel took it, unfolded it. A drawing, the arena, 2 people with swords, and a third, off to the side, with silver hair. He stands in the shadows and watches. Lily had drawn him before the fight began. She knew he would stand in the shadows. She knew he wouldn't step into the light. Daniel crouched down. He looked at Lily. She was looking at him seriously. 9-year-old eyes that held something much older than 9. He said, "Thank you." She nodded. Then she hugged him, quickly, briefly, as if she were afraid he would disappear if she held him too long. And she ran back to the Duke. 0 points. Always 0. From Lily. She hadn't hated him for a single second since that first breakfast, and that made her the most precious person in his life, and the most dangerous to his survival. Because every time Lily hugged him, his inner being fell silent, completely, as if he feared in that girl, or respected it, or remembered it. The boy she had replaced had died at the age of 7. Lily was 2 at the time. She didn't remember the real Adrian. She knew only the monster that came after. And then Daniel. 2 brothers, both strangers, but one of them remembered her allergy. That evening, Daniel sat in his room and looked at the drawing. 3 figures, 2 in the light, 1 in the shadows. He pinned the drawing to the wall above his bed, next to the others. 17 drawings from Lily. 17 weeks, 17 cats and horses, and 1 dragon. And now the arena, 114 chrono points. After the tournament, the balance was restored. The schadenfreude from his loss offset the losses from growing closer to Ethan and Celeste. A precarious balance, but a storm was coming, a rift on the border of the Morningstar domains. He could already feel it. The system was registering strange fluctuations. The magical background was shifting. Something was awakening in the north. Something big. Something connected to the entity within his chest. 2 halves of a single whole, the Dark Lord on the horizon and his anchor inside Adrian Morningstar. Daniel closed his eyes. There was little time left. 6 months until the rift. 6 months to prepare the people. 6 months to resolve the central question. How much was he willing to pay to remain himself? 6 months passed like one long exhalation. Daniel was preparing for the rift, for the battle, for what lurked inside. He spent another 20 chrono points on 3 modifications. The 9th for combat use of the shadow aspect, the 10th for physical endurance, the 11th for tactical thinking in battle. Each modification awakened his essence more strongly. After the 9th, he woke up with blood on his pillow. After the 10th, he saw a stranger's gaze in the mirror. For half a second. Dark, hungry, not his own. After the 11th, the essence spoke for the first time, not with words, with a sensation, as if someone inside his chest had turned around and looked him in the eyes from within, looked and smiled. Daniel clenched his teeth. He continued. A month before the rift, he gathered people, not formally, not by order, through conversations, one-on-one. Ethan was first. Daniel came to him in the evening, sat across from him, and told him what he could tell him, that a demonic rift was opening at the border of Morningstar's lands, that it was opening ahead of schedule, that the Academy Guard wouldn't be able to handle it, that they needed fighters who knew how to think, not just swing a sword. Ethan listened in silence. Then he asked why Morningstar was telling him this. Daniel replied that it was because Ethan was the best fighter in the academy, and because Daniel couldn't lead people into battle alone. He wasn't a hero. He was a poor fighter and an even worse motivator. He needed someone who would stand at the forefront and show the others that it was okay to be afraid, but not to run. Ethan looked at him for a long time. Then he said that this was the most honest request he'd ever heard from an aristocrat. And he agreed. Ayla Ashford. Daniel went to her empty-handed and with an open face. She met him with hatred, as always. But he didn't play the diplomacy game. He spoke plainly. The rift. Danger. He needed a powerful mage on the left flank. Her aspect of wind was the best of her generation. Without her, people would die. Ayla asked why she should help the Morningstars. Daniel replied that she didn't have to, that this wasn't about the Morningstars. It was about the villages on the border. Children lived there. Some of them are 6 years old. He didn't say Elliot's name. He didn't mention her brother. But Ayla heard it. He could see in her eyes that she'd heard it. She agreed, silently, with a nod, and she left. System +3. She hated him just a little more for knowing exactly where to push. Yuna song. She was the easiest one. Daniel came and laid out the facts. The rift, coordinates, approximate timing, the number of demonic creatures based on canonical descriptions. Yuna wrote it all down, checked her sources, confirmed it, and said she'd take the right flank. Then she looked at him and said one more thing. She said she knew Adrian wasn't the man he used to be, that she'd been him for 9 months, that there were 23 anomalies in her file. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what had happened. But she knew one thing. He wasn't the enemy. Not yet. Daniel nodded, said that was fair. Yuna nodded back and left. System 0. Yuna never hated him. She was studying him. And studying doesn't feed the system. Celeste, he didn't ask her to go into battle. She wasn't a fighter, but she was a coordinator, the best coordinator in the kingdom. Her aspect of light allowed her to see the entire battlefield, every fighter, every enemy, every movement. She could direct the troops like a conductor directs an orchestra. In the canon, she did this in the final battle. Here, she would do it sooner. Daniel asked her for help, not as a princess, as a person who sees what others do not. Celeste agreed immediately, without question, no strings attached, and she added that she would bring her notebook because she had started writing down tactical diagrams in that very notebook with blank pages. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He remained silent. Sadie. He wrote her a letter, asked her to set up a field hospital near the estate, bandages, medicine, food for the wounded. Sadie replied 2 days later, "Everything is ready. The infirmary is set up. Staff has been hired. She herself will be there." Daniel read her letter and felt something warm rise from his stomach to his throat. Sadie Rowe, an unnamed maid, mentioned just once in the canon. Now she was running a field hospital and doing it better than any aristocrat with a family tree going back 15 generations. Mira Carver. Daniel sent her a list of supplies, quantities, prices, delivery routes. He asked her to work out the logistics. Mira had it all figured out in 2 days. She sent a plan so detailed that Daniel read it 3 times. Every number was in place. Every route was optimal. She was a genius with numbers, and she was finally doing what she was made for. Lily. Daniel wrote her a separate message, not about the battle, about the evacuation. People live in the villages near the border, families, children. When the rift opens, they'll need to be taken away, quickly, quietly, no panic. Lily knew the estate and the surrounding area better than anyone. For 9 years, she had roamed these lands alone, unnoticed by anyone. She knew every path, every ravine, every shed where one could hide. Daniel asked her to map out evacuation routes. Lily sent a map, hand-drawn, with notes. 12 routes, 3 shelters, 2 emergency caches of water and food. She was 9 years old. And she had just drawn up an evacuation plan that was better than any plan Daniel had seen in the canon. Duke Renard. Daniel had spoken with him last. He had arrived at the estate a week before the rift. He walked into the study, sat down across from him, and fell silent. The Duke looked at him silently for a long time. Then he spoke first. He said he knew. Daniel didn't understand what he knew. The Duke said he knew that the person sitting in front of him wasn't his son. Silence. Daniel didn't move, didn't breathe. The Duke continued. 20 years ago, he himself had found himself in a stranger's body. He was someone else, from another world. He had tried to rewrite history, tried to save the boy, his son, in this world. He didn't make it in time. The entity woke up first, took the boy, and broke him. The editor, the previous one, the one who became the Duke, he lost. And after losing, he remained in this body. Broken, empty, knowing the truth but lacking the strength to change it. For 20 years, he remained silent. For 20 years, he watched as the entity wore the face of his dead son. For 20 years, he waited without knowing what for. And then, one morning, his son came down for breakfast and asked the cook about Lily's milk allergy. And the Duke understood. A new editor, the second one, a different one, a young one, and this one won't break, mustn't break. Daniel sat and listened, hands on his knees. His face was wet. He hadn't noticed when he'd started crying. The Duke, Renard, father, not his father, the father of the boy who was no longer there. 20 years of loneliness, 20 years of silence, and one word he'd been waiting for all this time. Hope. Daniel said one sentence. He said he wouldn't let him down. The Duke looked at him, and for the first time in 20 years, a crack appeared in his stony eyes. Not tears, a crack, through which light was breaking. The rift opened at dawn. The sky cracked, not a metaphor. It literally cracked. A black line ran from horizon to horizon as if someone had run a fingernail across blue paint. Then the line widened. Light poured out of it. Not white, not dark, none. Colorless light. Light from a place where color does not exist. And from this light, creatures crawled out. Daniel stood on the hill in front of the position and watched. He had seen this in the canon. Read the descriptions, edited them, added details, removed the superfluous, but the descriptions were words, and before him was reality, and reality was more terrifying than any words. The creatures moved incorrectly, not like animals, not like humans, like errors in a text, like typos that had taken shape. They flickered, disappeared half a step away, and reappeared a step closer. There were many of them. Dozens, then hundreds. Daniel turned toward the squad, Ethan in the vanguard, 20 fighters behind him, faces ashen, hands on their swords, eyes fixed on the rift. To the right, Yuna Song with a squad of 15 knights of the Order of the Silver Thorn, back straight, blade drawn, face calm, as if she were about to go for a morning jog. To the left, Ayla Ashford. Alone, without a squad. She doesn't need a squad. Her aspect of wind could cut the tops off trees 100 meters away. She stood with her eyes closed. Her hair was blowing in the wind. The air vibrated around her. Behind her, on a rise, was Celeste. Her aspect of light was turned up to maximum. She could see the entire field, every creature, every fighter, every meter of ground. Her voice was steady and clear. Coordinates, directions, numbers. A conductor before an orchestra. 2 kilometers behind, the field hospital. Sadie Rowe at the entrance. Gloved hands, a pale but calm face. Beside her, 8 doctors she had gathered over the course of a week. Further still, Mira Carver with the supplies, counting the number of arrows, bandages, water, food, every number in her head. Not a single one will be lost. And far from the field, on the trails between villages, Lily Morningstar leads people to the shelters. 12 routes, 3 shelters. A 9-year-old girl walks ahead and shows the way. The adults follow her, because she is the only one who knows these trails. Daniel turned toward the rift. He inhaled. He exhaled. The system showed 92 chrono points. Not much, but enough. He wasn't going to waste them on power. Not today. The entity was waiting for this. Waiting for him to pour all the world's accumulated hatred into himself and become a weapon. The one Adrian Morningstar was meant to become. A machine of destruction, the Dark Lord's dark mirror. Daniel didn't. He turned to Ethan and nodded. Ethan raised his sword. He screamed, not words, sound. Pure sound containing rage and fear and determination and everything that makes people heroes in those seconds when they stop thinking and start acting. The vanguard moved forward. The battle began. The first wave of creatures crashed against the line of swordsmen like water against stone. Ethan struck first. A new guard. Perfect balance. Every blow precise. Every movement was precise. The 3 weeks of training before the tournament had not been in vain. He fought as if he knew someone was watching him, someone who cared deeply that he survive. Yuna on the right flank worked like a well-oiled machine. Blade up, blade down, step, turn, strike. Her knights moved in perfect sync. T-17, people as one. The Order of the Silverthorn knew its business. Ayla on the left flank was a hurricane. Literally, the wind roared around her. The creatures were flung into the air and smashed against the ground. She moved through them without touching a single one. The wind did everything for her. She was not a warrior. She was an element. Celeste behind her gave orders. Her voice was steady. No pauses, no glitches. 20 creatures to the left of the third line. Yuna, shift the knights 10 meters north. Ethan, the second wave is coming in 30 seconds. Reorganize into a wedge. Ayla, there's a gap in the center. Close it. Every command was precise. Every word was in its place. Daniel stood behind the vanguard and did what he did best. He observed. He noticed. He corrected. A creature on the right was flanking the line. He shouted to Yuna. Yuna intercepted it. A group of 3 creatures is breaking through the left flank. He shouted to Ayla. Ayla swept them away with a gust of wind. The swordsman in the vanguard is wounded. Right shoulder. He called for a replacement. The fighter stepped back. Another took his place. He wasn't fighting. He was editing the battle in real time, spotting mistakes, plugging holes, moving people around, like words on a page, like characters in a scene. Put this one here, remove that one from there, add a pause here, speed up the pace there, structure, rhythm, balance. This was what he had been doing his whole life. Only instead of text, there were people, and instead of red marks in the margins, there was blood on the snow. The battle lasted 2 hours, 3 waves of creatures, each stronger than the last. Casualties: 7 wounded, 1 critically. Sadie treated them all. The infirmary was running. Mira kept track of supplies and sent equipment exactly when needed. Lily led all the villagers to shelters, not a single civilian on the field. After the third wave, there was a pause. Silence. The rift hung in the sky, black and empty. Nothing more was coming out of it, but it wouldn't close. Daniel looked at it and felt it. The essence within him was drawn to the rift, like a magnet to a magnet. 2 halves of a whole. The rift was a door, and the essence was the key. In the canon, the finale cost the lives of the Saint Virgin and the main character. They closed the rift with their bodies. A sacrifice. Beautiful. Cheap. Daniel had always considered this ending lazy. Sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. Death for the sake of beauty. As an editor, he would have crossed that out, made a note in the margins. Rewrite. Find another way. Don't kill the heroes for the sake of catharsis. Let them live. Now he had a chance. He closed his eyes, reached inside, toward the entity. It was there, huge, dark, hungry. It was waiting. Waiting for him to pour all his chrono points into it and throw the door wide open. It wanted to come out. It wanted to become the Adrian everyone feared, the weapon for which it had been imprisoned in this body 20 years ago. Daniel told it, no, not out loud, inside, quietly, firmly, no. The entity didn't understand. She pressed, pulled, called, promised power, promised victory, promised that the rift would close if he would just let go. Daniel said no again and reached not for her, for the system, for the chrono, glasses, to the tool that had been given to him along with the curse, the red pen, the last one, recharged a week ago. One phrase. He could cross out one phrase and rewrite it. Not an event. A phrase. A word spoken aloud. Daniel stood at the edge of the field. Snow under his feet. Blood on the snow. A rift in the sky. And he remembered the phrase. His own. From another life. From the office in Los Angeles. From the red corrections in the margins of the manuscript. The villain shouldn't be dumb just for the sake of the plot. Make him smart and let him lose gracefully. He wrote that 3 years ago in another world with another hand as another person. That was his philosophy, his credo, his way of seeing the world. The villain must lose, gracefully, with dignity, but lose. Daniel activated the red pen. He reached for the phrase. His phrase, it hung in space like a line of text, red letters on a white page. He crossed it out, slowly, letter by letter. The villain must not be dumb for the sake of the plot. Crossed out. Make him smart, crossed out, and let him lose gracefully, crossed out. A blank line, a white field. Daniel wrote in a new one, make him observant, and let him survive, quietly. The world shifted, not the earth, not the sky, the world, the structure, the fabric of the narrative. Something shifted at the very foundation of this story. The will of the narrative froze. For a second. For a single second, it stopped pressing, stopped pushing. It stopped trying to get him back on track because the tracks had changed. He hadn't changed to fit the tracks. The tracks had changed to fit him. The rift shifted. It narrowed. It didn't close, but it narrowed. The essence inside twitched like a fish on a hook. It hadn't expected this. Red pen didn't strike at the world, not at the enemy, not at the plot. She struck at Daniel himself, at his old philosophy, at the way of seeing the world that he brought with him. The villain must lose gracefully. No, the observant man must survive quietly. The entity retreated a step, one step back deeper. It hadn't left. It would be here. It would always be here, but today it had retreated because the feeder had changed the rules. Daniel opened his eyes. The rift was narrowing, slowly, like a wound that begins to heal. It won't close today, not completely, but it has stopped growing, and the creatures were gone. The field is quiet. Snow, blood, silence, footsteps behind him, heavy, familiar. Duke Renard, mourning the elder, approached him, stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, just like at the ball. Only now, instead of a hall, there was a field, and instead of chandeliers, a rift in the sky. The Duke placed a hand on his shoulder, a heavy hand, a strong one, the hand of a man who had waited 20 years for this moment. And he said one word, "Thank you." Daniel stood and said nothing. A hand on his shoulder, a word in the air. 6 people behind him, Ethan with a sword in his lowered hand, blood on his face. Alive, Yuna with a blade at her back. And not a scratch. Calm, as always, Ayla with disheveled hair. The wind had died down. She was breathing heavily, but she stood. Celeste with a notebook in her hands, the notebook in which she had been writing down tactical diagrams. That very notebook, the blank pages filled with her handwriting, her thoughts, her decisions. Sadie was by the infirmary. Her hands were covered in blood, someone else's blood. She had saved people, 7 wounded, all alive. Mira was by the supply wagons, a notepad in her hands. Numbers. She knew the exact consumption of every resource, down to the last arrow, down to the last bandage, and far beyond the field. On the path between the villages, Lily led the last group of residents back to their homes. 12 routes, 3 shelters, 0 civilian casualties, a 9-year-old girl, 0 casualties. They were all looking at him. At Adrian Morningstar, at the man the world had hated from the very first page, at the villain who was killed in chapter 41. They looked at him the way no one in the canon had ever looked at him. Not with fear, not with hatred, not with contempt, with something for which the system had no category. With something that yielded not a single chronopoint, with something that was worth more than any power. The system showed 12 chronopoints. The last red pen had consumed almost everything. The streams from these people had dried up. Each of them had stopped hating him. 7 sources, 7 taps. all shut off. He was weaker than ever and stronger than ever because the power wasn't in the chrono points. The power was in the fact that 7 people stood behind him not because he had ordered them to, but because he had noticed. Each of them, individually, by name, a specific person with a specific pain, and he did a specific thing that no one before him had done. Daniel stood on a snow-covered field with his father's hand on his shoulder and 12 pairs of glasses in reserve. Somewhere in the north, the Dark Lord opened his eyes for the first time because for the first time in 1,000 years, the history of this world had not gone according to plan. The second year lay ahead. The Holy Virgin, the Northern Campaign, the alliance of the great houses, sealing the rifts without sacrifice, and a question to which Daniel had no answer yet: who he was. Adrian. Daniel. Or a third person who did not yet exist, but that was for later. Right now, he stood there, breathing, looking up at the sky, where a crack was closing, and he quietly said to himself. Chapter 1. The end. Let's move on.